welcome, and I hope you're all basking in sunshine wherever you are. I wish I was. My name's Alison. I'm the General Secretary of Modern Church, and I'd like to welcome you to this, well, we're calling it a lecture, but it's going to be more of a conversation with Inderjit Bhogal this evening. This is one of our new-ish and regular sessions of online lectures, panel discussions and conversations, which we've really started since lockdown and the revolution of Zoom, realizing that we can reach a lot of people with some really interesting conversations. For those of you who are members of Modern Church, thank you and lovely to see you. For those of you, and thank you very much for your support. And for those of you who are new to Modern Church, welcome as well. It's great to have you on board, and we encourage you to explore our websites, have a look at our blogs, engage, subscribe to our blogs, and possibly even consider membership. That would be great, or making a donation. It's always welcome. We are, for those of you who don't know, we're an organisation of a certain age, 125 years, so I'm not quite sure what that qualifies for. It's certainly more than middle age. We've lived through modernism, postmodernism, and I think we're probably in a post-modern era now, probably due for another name change. But our value system has been consistent throughout all that time. So we were founded to encourage open and, in a way, no-holds-barred discussions around theological ideas and the engagement of theological ideas with the rest of contemporary society, so the sciences, the arts and culture, and that's what we value doing. And we throw in a huge amount of social justice into that and a passionate commitment to diversity and to inclusion. I should just mention to you that we have, it's still not too late to register for our annual conference, which is July the 17th to the 19th. And we're looking at a related issue to this evening's conversation. It's called I Have a Dream, Deconstructing Racism in the Church. And we have some amazing speakers. So do encourage you to either come for a day or as much as you can for the whole conference if possible. So now to this evening. Our format is going to be a conversation. Inderjit's going to answer some questions which overall will explore the whole issue of people movement across the world, what that means for us as Christians, what the environment is like in the UK at the moment, politically, around refugees, asylum seekers, and immigration. And fantastic to draw on Inderjit's amazing background and years of experience with this whole theme, which we will explore together, both in terms of action and also lobbying and policy change and encouraging different approaches, more positive approaches from government and legislation. So you can contribute. There is a live chat function on the YouTube live feed. So do put your questions or comments in there. Urge you to make them brief, because my wonderful colleague Nick Tall will be translating those questions to me via our Zoom chat here. So do contribute. Obviously, if they're relevant to what Inderjit's saying at the time, I'll put them in there. Otherwise, there'll be time at the end to catch up on the questions that have arisen during the evening. We're doing this now, partly because we're in the run-up to Refugee Week, which is the 19th to the 25th of June, and also to build on a wonderful blog that Inderjit wrote for Modern Church fairly recently in the wake of one of the many negative conversations that happened around the small boats and the needs of people who are attempting to find a way a legal way to enter the UK to claim asylum and sanctuary. Inderjit is soon to launch, or in the process of launching, Churches of Sanctuary, which is a development from Cities of Sanctuary. Now, Inderjit obviously is one of the founders, the key founder of Cities of Sanctuary, and I'm sure he'll say more about that, which is one of those wonderful examples of something which started small in Sheffield and has got bigger and bigger, and now is spread across the UK and includes all sorts of different sectors, charities, schools, universities, all embracing this vision of sanctuary and safety for people who need it. Inderjit's a theologian. He is a writer. He's a former president of the Methodist Conference. You must have been one of the youngest, Inderjit, because it was about 20 years ago now, I think the first year of the new millennium. And Inderjit's also passionately committed to interfaith issues and is a former leader of the Corrymeela community. So the whole piece, interfaith, justice, sanctuary for refugees, those themes are very close to Inderjit's heart. And finally, Inderjit, welcome.
Thank you very much, Alison.
Great.
Lovely to share in the session tonight.
Good, and people can now see your face. So first question, I just wondered if you could share with people your personal, what you'd like people to know about you as a person, and what's your motivation? What's your motivation been for the prophetic work that you've been undertaking for so long?
Yeah, okay, well, first thing to say, I live in Sheffield. I'm married to Kathy. I'm a grandfather. As you say, I enjoy walking, I enjoy cooking, writing, photography, sport. And I think I've done quite a lot of the long distance walking routes around the UK, like the West Highland Way, the Great Glen Way, and so on. And I've created a long distance route myself, a 60-mile walking route between York and Hull, entitled the Wilberforce Way. That was launched to mark the 200th anniversary of passing the abolition of the Transatlantic Slave Trade Act, 2007. I've walked from Sheffield to London. That wasn't a pleasurable walk. It was more to do with the something I'm passionate about. I've written a letter to the Prime Minister asking that asylum seekers are not detained in conventional prisons because they're not criminals. And I actually hand delivered the letter. I could have put it in the post. I think at that time it would have cost 50p maybe, first class, but it took me a month. I took the whole of Lent period to walk to London as a way of spreading the word and increasing awareness of the issues. At the time, I was seen as a bit of a lunatic lefty minister. I walked on my own. I couldn't really get people to walk with me. One or two brave souls joined me, but mostly I was on my own. But now it's a mainstream issue, really. So I feel a bit more supported. I'm passionately committed to the achievement of justice, especially in immigration matters, and also, as you say, promoting good interfaith relationships and religious freedom. And on top of everything you've said, I'm currently working with churches together in Britain and Ireland to develop and promote the Church of Sanctuary network and movement. Last year, I was a recipient of the World Methodist Peace Award for some of my work. And I've recently published a little book called Hospitality and Sanctuary for All, which I can probably show you if I have a copy around here. Here you go. So a lot of what I'm going to say this evening, if anybody wants more of that, it's in there, and you can obtain the book Hospitality and Sanctuary for All from Churches Together in Britain and Ireland for a donation. What's been my motivation, though? What brings me to do some of the things I'm really passionate about? I think to explain that, I've got to go back to at least, well, maybe 400 years. Slave trade I've mentioned. When that was coming to an end, then you had indentured labor, and so Indians were taken to the West Indies, and other parts of the world. Um, and some of my family were part of the movement. And then independence of India from Britain in 1947, a really bad period in the history of the world, where one of the biggest mass movements of people, some 12 million people moving between India and Pakistan, crossing the borders. My parents, who would then have been young teenagers, 13, 14, were right at the um, at the border, at the front line, and they will have, particularly my mum, I think, will have witnessed some awful things, because there was um, rape, abductions, carrying off women, taking them away, and all kinds of things. I think their parents would have said to them, "Get out of here and find some safety." You can imagine uh, parents of young Ukrainians or Sudanese or Syrians saying to them, "Get out, go and find somewhere safe." So my parents went, and they went to East Africa. I was born in Nairobi, and then Kenya became independent. So a lot of my travels and my life is about British politics, actually. So when Kenya became independent, we found ourselves wandering around Tanzania for 9 months, going from one place to another every 2 weeks. Then we ended up moving to the UK to live in Dudley, in the West Midlands. My real claim to fame is I went to the same school as Lenny Henry, so we both left school without any qualifications whatsoever, because our teachers didn't think we were up to too much, but we both made a bit of a contribution to the nation. But from my earliest time in the UK, I was 11 at the time. Because I could speak English quite fluently, a lot of Indian people, particularly Asian people, who were in trouble with immigration, nearly all of them were, came to me to ask me to fill their forms, and help them with navigating the processes. You know, so I've been aware of immigration matters for all my life. From even before I was born, it's been, in my bones and blood and being. So personally, rather than professionally, I'm very familiar with immigration matters and policies and procedures, and I'm familiar with the fears and frustrations and pains of people of all kind of backgrounds around decisions to leave home. And I have been determined to take simple steps to seek justice, mercy, and humility in policy and procedure. So that's okay. So I've not become passionate about things that are important to me lately, since say 2015, with the Syrian crisis and refugees. More recently, it's been there all my life. I could say more, but let's just leave it there and see if anybody wants to know more. I can say more, but I could speak for the whole evening on just this. But you go to your next question.
Fascinating, Inderjit. Thank you so much. I'm really struck by the span from the very personal and familial all the way through to these massive geopolitical, historical changes and movements, and the fact that some human beings are so much more by accident of birth. You're thrown right into where everything is changing and shifting, and you have to just survive. And then those of us who have the privilege or accident of, or luxury of, just not having to think about it, and that we'll talk later about how we can change the way in which those very different experiences of the world can be brought together, and people can actually understand and be more aware of the difference in terms of our life experience that we have. So we'll come back to that later. I just wanted to say that I read today that there is some danger of child detention coming back. You talked about, your campaigns to end detention for asylum seekers, and there will be Citizens UK are organising a demonstration during Refugee Week on that, because that's something they work very hard to end. And now it looks like it's coming back. I don't know whether you briefly want to say something about that before we move on into.
No, I visited every detention centre in the country when I was president of the Methodist Conference, because I wanted to see for myself what was going on. And yeah, it's been a scandal, in British life for decades. And I want to see the end of detention. Nobody should be detained. It's not necessary. And so we have detention centers, but in a way, the hotels are a kind of a detention center now. Those barges being brought in, they're a kind of a detention center. They're all about holding people. They are imprisoned. They can't go anywhere. They can't do anything. They can't work. They are captive, and far too many children. There are around 10,000 unaccompanied children in Britain stuck within the immigration processes. All right. During the Second War, 10,000 children were brought from Germany to the UK in the kindergarten programs, and we applaud that. But it's appalling that there are 10,000 children now who are actually in detention or in kind of awful conditions in this country. So they don't have to be imprisoned. I think being in the hotel it's not a luxury as a person seeking sanctuary. And being in those barges, they are awful conditions to be in, and needs to be brought to an end.
And of course, you can live in the community without settled status, and similarly, the freedom that others have because you have no citizenship.
So I wrote, after I visited all the detention centers, I actually wrote a little report. It's called Unlocking the Doors, which is what I wanted government to do. And I wrote it specifically for the Home Secretary at the time, who was called Jack Straw, and gave him a copy, and to other members of Parliament at that time, 1997, 98 to the year 2001, when I was doing all this. So unlock the doors, let the people out, and they are not a threat, and let people live freely, let them work. If they could work, they would pay their way, they would pay into the taxes, and there wouldn't be a burden on the taxpayer. All this idea of 6 million a year, and I'm told in the next few years, Britain could be spending 6 billion to stop people coming here. All right, that's a lot of money. To be cheaper to build hospitality and sanctuary. Somebody needs to do some research on how much money is spent globally on stopping people crossing borders for safety. How much money is spent in a year? And if all that money, instead of building walls and barriers and obstacles in people's way, could be used to help us to manage the process, it could be a lot cheaper.
Yes, we're jumping ahead of ourselves in the order, which is great. But I did want to. You talked about obviously some pivotal moments growing up, both in terms of where you lived, how you were constantly on the move, ending up in Dudley, the racism in the education system. I wondered what other key pivotal moments and big shifts in focus there've been in your life story?
So the interesting thing is that I've not, the things I've been doing in my life, I didn't sit down one day and think, this is what I would like to do with my life. I've ended up doing it because I've just responded to whatever that was the situation around me. I think if I look at the pivotal moments, I mean, obviously coming to this country was an important thing. We could have gone somewhere else, but we came here, and I found my early experience in school very difficult. It was a new experience for me um, to be made to feel unwelcome just because of the color of my skin. And I've always gone to a place of worship. My family are all Sikhs, and we've always gone to the nearest place of worship in Kenya. That was a Sikh temple, of course. When we came here in the early 60s, there were only two Sikh temples in this country. One was in Leeds, one was in Smethwick, and there wasn't one near us. So I started doing whatever I've always done, to go to the nearest place of worship. It happened to be a Methodist church. As far as I was concerned, I wanted to worship God. It didn't matter where I was going. And actually, it was a remarkable welcome. There was somebody standing at the door who said, "Welcome, young man. Lovely to see you. Come on in." And so I'm here, I think, because of that welcome, sitting here today with all my history behind me. If I hadn't been welcomed, I wouldn't have gone back again. I think that's, and it's underlines everything that City of Sanctuary is about, to, people who are far from home and in a new country, just a good word of greeting, and to make to feel welcome rather than to have hostility towards you, to have hospitality. It makes a big difference. So that's number one. It's had a big impact on who I am and how I am. I think then, while I was at school, although I could speak English fluently, as I said, my school kept sending me to a remedial school to, for treatment, so to learn English. And then when I began to grow into the Methodist Church, I was required in the Methodist Church to have elocution lessons. And for that, I was sent to somebody in Wolverhampton, not far from Dudley. And it was a little church in Wolverhampton, Stratton Street Methodist Church, and the minister there, it's surrounded by a Sikh community. So about 30 Methodists and 300 Sikhs worshipping in the local Sikh temple, 30 in the Methodist church. And the Methodist minister said to me, "So, well, what are we supposed to be doing? What is it? Well, how do we engage with the Sikh community?" No, asking me as somebody from a Sikh background. I said, "Meet them, go out and meet them, go to the Gurdwara, on Sunday morning after your service, go to the temple, and you'd be welcomed and you will have lunch and so on, but just build relationships." Anyway, that was 50 years ago now, all right, giving my age away. And that was the beginning of the Wolverhampton Interfaith Group. It grew out of that conversation. I didn't start the interfaith group, but that conversation did. So, and it's interfaith groups are everywhere now, and good, and they've had an important part to play. And then in my ministry, my first appointment was to Wolverhampton, and I was caught up in many anti-deportation campaigns there. There's a big issue in the 80s. And I remember putting up what I called an anti-deportation shrine in the middle of Wolverhampton, asking people to come and pray for those who have. It was really about a public making visible something that was going on behind the scenes, deportation. Say, this is what's happening. Pray and protest. Those two things go hand in hand. We organized campaigns, we organized prayers, and then around the same time, there was a Sri Lankan young man called Viraj Mendes, who was in a a sanctuary in Hume, Church of Ascension, Hume, and in the end his sanctuary was broken and police took him out and he was deported, and he still lives outside the UK. All that, was pivotal for me in Wolverhampton in how things developed. Then I moved to Sheffield, and I thought, I'm not going to have anything to do with interfaith or immigration matters. I need to break from this kind of stereotype building around me. So I just spent time in Sheffield, and I was faced with homelessness. And so I engaged with homeless people in the streets of Sheffield and started something that's sadly still going on, called HARK, Homeless and Rootless at Christmas, and which became a year-long program supporting homeless people, people sleeping on streets, coming alongside them and just befriending people. And I thought back in this is the early 90s, there won't be any homeless people by the year 2000. This is a temporary thing. Let's do this. And so, to my shame, it didn't give me any pride that work is still going on. I'm ashamed that there are people sitting on streets and sleeping on streets and living in bad housing conditions. So that was important. And then I felt very desperately alone as a person of Asian background, Black, politically Black, culturally Asian, in church, and wanted to do something about Black leadership, and organized in Sheffield here, 3rd of June 1993, okay, 30 years ago, this last Saturday, the first international Black theology conference ever to take place in the UK. In my little church where I was minister, we just held it there, and we had people from all around the world, and and some of whom in the UK have gone on to do great work theologically. But last Saturday, on the 3rd of June, we had the first, a big international Asian women theologians conference, because the invisible people in the life of the church now are women, Asian women. Where are they? What's happening to them in terms of leadership? So I'm engaged with that. So I'm actually secretary of an organization that's run by women, but I'm I make the tea, I take the minutes, I go out 10 minutes before the end of the meeting to put the kettle on. I do the fundraising. So I'm I do all the secretarial kind of stuff. And it's really to grow Asian women leadership, and I work in the background. And then I think the other thing, I talked about walking to London. I was sitting in my synod in Sheffield, going back a few years now, and a group of asylum seekers in a detention center in Bedford went on a hunger strike because of the conditions they were living in. And I was really appalled by that people have to go on a hunger strike, and really angry. And I wanted to stand up and ask the synod to, pass a notice of motion to say we are annoyed about this. And then I thought, I don't know about you, Alison, but I feel passing a notice of motion is a bit like passing wind. It kind of relieves the person who does it and creates a stink for everybody else. And I thought, right, we're not going to pass any window notice of motion. So I wrote a letter while I was sitting on the back row to the Prime Minister. And then I went to the front and I said to Synod, I've written this letter. I'm going to send it to the Prime Minister, but actually I'm going to walk it. I'm going to hand deliver it. And I hope the Synod will support me. Well, whatever Synod did, that's what I did. And the following Lent, I walked to London, and that was an important thing. I think my walking actually chimes with people like Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi. You know, they use walking as an important form of campaigning and protesting. And then last thing I want to say, you talked about City of Sanctuary. Well, in Sheffield, I became aware of a lot of work going on with uh, people seeking sanctuary, and I convened a meeting of all the organizations, and then I um, I said, if we all work together, we can make a big impact in our city. You know, and I talked about cities of refuge, and said we if we work together and get others to work with us, we could become a city of sanctuary. Now, I'll say a bit more about that. But these are the moments, these are the kind of things that have been really important in my life. And um, yeah, there are others, but those 7 things stand out for me.
7's a very significant number, isn't it? Biblically. But I'm also thinking you've encompassed there a range of, you've talked about different ways in which change can happen or be made to happen, or and I'm really struck by this sense of one person that held out his hand to you as you arrived at that Methodist church and welcomed you, and how significant you've said that is. And I think for people engaging with this conversation now, who are in churches thinking, you know, what can I possibly do? That actually sometimes it's those really at personal level manifestations of our discipleship that we can't know. I'm sure that person never knew as the years went by, you know, who you became and what role that played in it. So we never know what difference we're making just by simply being who we're called to be. Also, you mentioned the prayer and prophecy, and the really having the shrine is it's a symbolic act, isn't it? A symbolic act that you said you're wearing a stole, you told us before, which I'm sure you'll explain later, but that's a symbol, you know, let you explain. That's a symbol there's all sorts of ways of symbolizing our commitments. And I know St James's Piccadilly has had various art installations that through art symbolize what we stand for, what we protest against, what we're against, but also what we're for, what we're angry about, and what change we're trying to make. And I think in those 7 things, you've touched on all sorts of different ways that different kinds of personalities and people can embrace and adopt and be part of. So thank you for that. And I'm wondering, you know, that takes us into the theological area of how and where God is at work in all those different of action, and what you've observed. How have you known when God is at work, and how have you seen God at work in those things as you've embraced them?
I've got a very simple answer to that question. Looking back, I have discerned the divine presence and wisdom and nudging in what now appear to me to be painful moments and situations as I look back, the things I've talked about, when barriers have appeared, when, you know, there's been obstacles, when it's been a bit tough. And as I look back at all those moments I've talked about, what I've done is I've just taken the next step. I've responded to whatever the situation was in the best way I could. And I've seen barriers fade, walls fall, and doors open. No. So my experience of God has been in those moments of pain and difficulty and hardship. And I've not been waiting for God to, you know, do something or anything like that. I do what I feel is right in front of my face. You know, you just do what needs to be done. Always remember reading about Martin Luther King when he was having a really difficult time. People making life very hard for him. And one night when he couldn't sleep and he was pacing around in his bedroom, so he came down to the kitchen, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat down with his head in his hands, thinking, "What, what the heck, you know? Why am I doing all this? And I could just have a nice quiet life." And then he says, while I was sitting there in his kitchen, God spoke to him and said, "You stand up for justice and truth, and you will find I'm with you." And I think that's me. So you know, I think I would say God is a God of life, and I always find God in anything that's about um, being creative and, you know, making life better, and anything that's about enhancing life. And so for me, protest is not to be against something. When I'm protesting, I'm not saying what I'm against. What I'm doing is I'm saying what I'm in favor of. That's what protest means. To pro means to be in favor of. Test is to testify. What are you testifying in favor of? So I say, don't tell me what you're against. Let's not focus our energy on what we are against. Let's focus our energy on what we are in favor of. What do we want to see happening? Do that, you know. So I'm not um I'm not um constantly um saying I'm against hatred and hostility. I just feel I want to promote humanity and hospitality. No, do the positive thing, give people a direction, um, and let's look at the way we want to walk, rather than just uh, dispelling all our energy on that which we don't like. So of course there are things we don't like. Of course there are things we're unhappy about. Of course there are things which give us pain. But you know, think of think of those things which are life-giving, because the purpose of God in Christ is fullness of life. I've come so that you might have life in all its fullness. You know, what can we do to to work for the fullness of life for ourselves, but for all people?
Which takes us very neatly into the question of churches and sanctuary, churches of sanctuary, which is a new, well, it's a development of obviously all the work you've been doing around cities of sanctuary. And so just wondered if you could say, in this time as we lead up to Refugee Week, what is a church of sanctuary? Why do we need them? And how can those who are engaging with this conversation take part? What can we do?
Yeah, I think, as I said, in the 80s, I was involved in churches of sanctuary. It's not a new thing, you know. Actually, church of sanctuary is a ancient concept. 1,000 years ago, every cathedral was a cathedral of sanctuary. You know, Durham Cathedral has a sanctuary knocker, and if anybody was in trouble, particularly people who were being chased unjustly or being victimized unjustly, they could go, and if they could knock on this knocker, they would have to be given sanctuary. And there was space around churches where there would be no feudal activity, and you had to put away your hostilities, and you know, and be safe, and to provide safety. So it's been part of church history for a long, long time, and it actually goes right back to Hebrew codes of ethics, and cities of refuge. Um, Children of Israel spent 40 years in the wilderness. They fell out with each other. They hurt each other, and they, you know, took revenge and so on. To manage that, they came up with a simple formula: only an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So that's what today would be called the principle of proportionality. Don't use more force than is used against you. Um, but of course, there were people who would kill you if you took their, leg or limb or eye. And so God said to Moses, it was God who said to Moses, set up 6 cities of refuge, so that if anybody's life is in danger because they've committed some crime, unintentionally, they could go to these cities and have safety there while their case is processed. It wasn't about avoiding or evading the law. It was about being safe while their case was being processed. So that's the origins of it. And when I was talking in Sheffield at the origins of City of Sanctuary, I referred to this concept and said, we need cities now. We'll call them cities of sanctuary, cities of refuge. We'll call them cities of sanctuary. And we want to have cities where people whose cases are being processed, people seeking sanctuary, that while they are with us, we will make sure they have hospitality and welcome and that they are safe. And we'll work for that and we'll pledge ourselves to that. So that was that's the formula, that's the principle at the root of City of Sanctuary. Ancient. It's not a novel, new, unimagined idea that I came up with. It's just, let's do what people have done in the past. Let's revive that. And so there are, there are around 120 cities, towns, and villages, areas, boroughs of sanctuary, working to that simple idea that I came up with, and talked about in Sheffield. And that's grown into now people using the same values in, there are a third of our universities of sanctuary. There are over 500 schools of sanctuary. There are theatres, libraries, gardens of sanctuary. And I now, in my retirement, I've committed myself to, with churches together in Britain and Ireland, to build and promote and develop churches of sanctuary. So it's a faith-based initiative, not a political concept. It's a call to prophetic witness. It's an expression of hospitality as a clear challenge to hostility. All right. What's the one thing we want to speak into this culture of hostility that's being created, the environment of hostility? Well, challenge hostility with hospitality. So the aim is to take steps to build protective hospitality. If you talk about hospitality, it's not about just being polite and nice to people, and making cups of tea and having samosas. It's protective, protecting people whose lives are in danger. That's what biblical hospitality is about. So build protective hospitalities in ways that are mutually enriching. So it's not a one-way process, but two-way, and it's about solidarity. And the hope is that churches will become places for all and proud to foster welcome, hospitality, and safety to people fleeing violence and persecution as a clear demonstration of Christian discipleship. So all churches, I'm sure, take pride in being places of welcome. And many churches, I'm sure, are thoroughly engaged with supporting refugees and people seeking sanctuary. I prefer to talk, by the way, of people seeking sanctuary rather than asylum seekers. So whenever I say people seeking sanctuary, I'm talking about, in quotes, asylum seekers. So what's the added value of being a church of sanctuary if you're a welcoming church anyway? I think that being a church of sanctuary is about strengthening and embedding your ethos and culture of welcome and hospitality. It connects you to a wider network of churches in churches together in Britain and Ireland and the wider City of Sanctuary network, which is engaging with refugees and people seeking sanctuary. And it takes you on a journey to build collaboration, to work together, to know that you are part of a movement endorsed by a whole wide range of people. So becoming a church of sanctuary is about being part of a movement to build cultures of welcome and hospitality. And you are enabled to engage in more informed ways, to connect with quite serious issues that matter to you, and that you feel you're not on your own, and there is something you can do, and you can connect with refugees, people seeking sanctuary, and help them to connect with supporting networks and energies. So a church of sanctuary will have three important elements to it. Number one is about learning, that you commit yourselves in your congregation, and I'm talking about the whole congregation and not one or two people who are passionate about things, but everybody is engaged in saying there's so much mythology, so much fiction about numbers, and all these people coming here to take all our jobs and all that. Well, let's look at the facts, let's learn about the actual situation. And let's do that by actually listening to people who are coming here. Why are they coming here? What's their story? So you intentionally engage in learning, and to work from facts and not fiction. That's number one. Number two, that you embed the values and cultures of welcome, hospitality, and safety as part of the values of your congregation and community, and use those to support refugees and people seeking sanctuary, and include them in your activities. Value people, listen to their stories, let them make their contribution, and you are enriched. So every aspect of your church life then has that way of being. So you embed it throughout your congregation and culture. And thirdly, that you are loud and proud in all this. You make sure everybody knows about what you're doing, and you do this by putting it on your website, and in your newsletters, in your magazines, and make sure. So don't do this under the radar in an embarrassed and ashamed way, but do it as with pride. So the most important thing is that everybody's engaged in it. As I say, it's not left to those who hold office, those who wear dog collars, or those who particularly hold a passion for this work. Buildings, yes, can provide shelter, but actually what I'm talking now, in the 80s, the buildings it's about taking people into buildings. I would say now it's about sanctuary in community, the whole congregation being a sanctuary. And individuals and single congregations can provide hospitality, but it is stronger when we work in collaboration with others in this two-way process. So there's a lovely Celtic proverb which I discovered on the walls of Belfast Town Hall. It is in the shelter of each other that the people live. That's the sanctuary I'm talking about. I'm talking about church, but church is not a building. It's people, it's us, it's community, and it's about the congregation being a sanctuary. Can we work in such a way that we, it's the human warmth, that handshake, the welcome, and that's what I'm talking about. And so there are churches that are taking this on, and many churches now are getting into all this, and it's a growing movement and network. so there are so many universities and schools of sanctuary. I'd like to think every church is a church of sanctuary, but we have to take certain steps to make that happen. So I'd like everybody listening in, get your church, your congregation, your community of faith to be a church of sanctuary. And there's more about that in that book, Hospitality and Sanctuary for All.
And presumably the Cities of Sanctuary website and the churches together in Britain and Ireland website.
Yeah.
And also I noticed this week's Methodist Church on their website, they're featuring.
Yeah. Joint Public Issues team are working on this, and that's good, really.
So I love the fact that there's this ancient historic tradition that we're reconnecting with, that is the empowering thing for faith communities to know this is a tried and tested thing, right? It's something that we're reinventing for our context. And in a way, through all those 120 towns, villages, cities, they are working to a biblical, probably unknowingly working to this kind of biblical rubric and changing how people relate to one another. And it feels like it's the church as a sanctuary. It's what we've lacked is a sort of infrastructure for supporting people, enabling people to support one another, to express that solidarity. And it feels like a really positive way of enabling people. And I think in the process of listening, because you talked a lot about the sanctuaries, about listening to stories, and in a way that's the best counter to the lies that we're told. And the listening that happens doesn't just transform the lives of those seeking sanctuary, it transforms the lives of those who are supporting. You talked about it being two-way. So actually it feels like it's another way of revivifying and transforming church life for everyone, which we need. Yeah. So tell us more about the current, you have talked a bit about it, but the current political climate in the UK around the whole issue of migration, people movement, which is such a massive global thing. But obviously we are part of a nation state that has its own policies. And what's your observation on how all that is sort of, working itself out at the moment?
I think if there's one word that sums up the current political environment, it's the word hostile, isn't it? And it's about, the Prime Minister says it, the Home Secretary says it, to create such a horrible environment, such a scary environment that people think, oh, I don't want to go there, as a deterrent, as if that's what is required. The thing is, when people's lives are in danger and they're running, fleeing to escape danger to their lives from war or poverty or extreme weather, persecution, they aren't going to be put off by, they aren't going to be scared by somebody saying, oh, well, we'll send you to Rwanda then, that won't put people off. As one person seeking sanctuary said to me, when your life is in danger, you'll walk through fire to find safety. Why is it we get onto that useless boats to escape? Well, what's the option? If we stay, it's dangerous, we might die, so we get on the boat and think, well, that's dangerous, we might die, but we don't have an option. You just do it. So I think that's my concern, that this hostile, it's intentional hostile environment being created, and I um, think that one way in which that's being kind of fostered, promoted politically, is by having these images of all these people coming here to Britain, from all these refugees, globally, millions are coming here. And even the Brexit kind of campaign, do you remember the picture that persuaded everybody was this line of people queuing to come to Britain? Even recently, the numbers which have been given, 600,000 net migration in UK. What is important in all this is to note that the numbers of people who are coming to Britain seeking sanctuary are actually very small. No. So Home Office will say with the numbers coming here are unprecedented. That's why we have so many people living in hotels and in these barges costing us £6 million a day. Well, actually, all that is the myth, is the fiction, is the lies, really. According to the Oxford University's Migration Observatory, the numbers who were coming to the UK 10 years ago for asylum purposes were double what they are now. Yet the message, political messages, they're unprecedented numbers, So both of those things can't be true. What's happening is that while the numbers coming here are quite small, the Home Office is quite inefficient in dealing with cases, and it's taking a long time to process people's cases, and because of that, the numbers grow. It's not because more people are coming here, it's because it's just kind of clogging up the system because it's quite inefficient and cumbersome and costly. And one of the reasons why it's like that is that the first decision takes such a long time and is so often wrong, because then people appeal, and you then get into a whole new process. And in fact, the majority of people who appeal then succeed in their case. In fact, the majority of people who apply for asylum actually succeed. Therefore, there must be genuine people, seeking sanctuary. There are millions of people who are made homeless, displaced by war and violence and persecution and terrible natural conditions, dams breaking, okay, fires, earthquakes, quite apart from wars, Ukraine, Sudan, Syria, so there are lots of people who are displaced, and it's nothing to be glad about. It's a shameful fact. So I think, and the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees says that 90% of the world's refugees are either from a country in war or close to war. 90%, right? So instead of trying to stop people coming here, stop the wars. No, then they won't come here, because everybody wants to live safely in their own home. So that's what I would say. So stop giving all these weapons and selling weapons to despots who create such havoc and make life so difficult. So 90% are from countries in or close to conflict. And then 90% of those who manage to get out of their country actually just go next door. Ukrainians go to Romania or Poland. Sudanese go to Chad, Ethiopia, Egypt. Afghanistanis going to Pakistan. All right, that's what people do. They take the easiest route to safety. And then there's a much smaller number, a trickle. If 90% just go next door, we're talking about, much smaller number going further and taking awful risks, paying often to criminal gangs who exploit vulnerable people who are already hurting, taking huge amounts of money from them, saying we'll get you there, and in the process, then many perish. This rope I'm wearing, all right, I visited Lampedusa, first piece of rock people reach in Europe, leaving North Africa. Many boats have perished in that bit of the Mediterranean Sea, and many have died. I visited Lampedusa, and there are dozens of boats on Lampedusa, dozens of small boats. They are boats as opposed to dinghies that have capsized, and many people have lost their lives. And I got on one and I picked up this rope, and I just thought, I wonder what stories this rope could tell if it could speak. And so a stole is, it represents the cross of Christ, which you carry. That's what a stole is, the yoke of Christ. And I'll wear this because this is the cross in the world. What's happening to people who, even as we speak, many are, in peril on the seas. So we are talking about a very small number of people who actually come to Europe, and then an even smaller number who come to Britain. So Britain is not the number one destiny of the world's refugees, but that's what officials tell us. So what I'm saying, Alison, is this awful hostile atmosphere is being created with some awful figures and ways of putting together statistics, and effectively the doors are shut, and it's, none of us want to see people going on useless boats to find safety. We don't want that. But for me, the way to deal with that is to make people's lives safe where they are, and other actions that can be taken. So it's all fanned by mythology, the way numbers are given, and recently, all the refugee charities working together have come up with a charter in response to this. They say there are 4 things they want to say. 1, people should be able to seek safety in the UK, no matter how they come here. No, that's the number 1 requirement. Number 2, that people should be able to live safely and in dignity in this country while they are waiting to hear about their application for asylum and refugee status. And thirdly, want to see a fairer and faster decision-making process, because it's horrific waiting for your case to be processed. And fourthly, it's something we can all do, which is to do all we can to build, help people to build a better life for themselves. It is about life, and to make sure that they have adequate support, and we can all help with that. Again, I can say a lot more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, we have a question, actually. We have a question from somebody who says it's about the Home Office inefficiency in processing asylum and what the political motivation is. The political motivation run the system down, so we're not granting asylum at all. So you make the rules more complicated and you make the cases more complicated, which need more time to investigate. Whereas you'd think that it's in no one's interests to drag the process out. So it seems kind of counter illogical somehow.
It is. I would say it's good point. Thank you for saying that. I say that to the questioner. I think what's going on is that from the perspective of people caught up in this process, it's about wearing them down. I think the hope is that they'll get so fed up, they'll say, I'm going. I can't cope with this anymore. And when I find myself talking to people in that situation, I always say to them, don't go, because the plan is to bring you to that point. But you are here because your life is in danger, and it is, it is required by every nation in the world to protect people whose lives are in danger. UK is a signatory to the UN conventions on refugees and the protection of refugees.
So that actually puts the support that we're talking about in terms of church as a sanctuary in a different light, doesn't it? Because if the intention is to wear down individuals who are legitimately seeking asylum, the more support we can offer, the more we're working against that system which is trying to wear them down. So in effect, the pastoral and practical support becomes in itself a form of resistance.
Good point, Alison. Quite right. Yeah.
So you've mentioned, individuals. I'm just thinking that the question we had was, it sounds like a concept. It's 2 words, isn't it? Hostile environment.
Yeah.
It obviously has some major impacts on the people whose stories you and others, and I do encourage people who are watching live who have experience of because I'm sure many people do have experience of working with refugees. What are some of the aspects of the toll that it's taking on real people's lives, Inderjit?
I'll just give you one story, okay, which illustrates many other stories, and it's somebody I'm working with. I try not to take on cases, I try not to take on working with people to help them with their situation, because it's a huge task, and as I say, I'm not involved in this as a professional, but just as something that matters to me personally. There are organizations out there that support people seeking sanctuary, and I try to direct them to them. But sometimes for various reasons, there is a person quite close to us who I've got involved with, and it's a lady on her own, and a very young child. She came here. Well, I won't go into the details of why, because it's quite personal. But the important thing is that she has applied for asylum. She has a legitimate case, and she's now on her 3rd appeal. All right. When I saw her a couple of days ago, and I'll see her again in a couple of days to look at the next steps. When I saw her a couple of days ago, she was saying, my blood pressure is up here, my stress levels up here, my daughter is not well, and she's not. She's got very particular conditions. Her health is, badly affected both of their health. It's in a horrible condition for them both, and they live in um, reasonably okay apartment, a room with the kitchen, and close to a number of people I know who are giving them support. But we'd written an appeal letter and put in all the kind of supporting um, evidence, including a letter from me um, as a local minister and so on. Anyway, um, she keeps getting asked like, oh, we need more information. Can you send it all again, please? No. So when I sat with her 2 days ago to rewrite the letter, of course, it's changed a bit. The circumstances have changed a bit. Health conditions have changed a bit. So I'm conscious that one of the things that happens when you do this is that officials then think, oh, that's a bit different from, are you telling the truth? And so it becomes part of what is then held against you. You think you made a case a bit stronger, but then the response can be, you're not really, you didn't say this the last time. And I've seen that game being played. I've so often, and people get caught in that. So I have to think very carefully about how we do things. So all this, what it means is that it keeps getting pushed back, and there's a game going on of trying to catch people out. What the purpose seems to be to say, you're not telling the truth. We can't. You're not reliable. We can't believe this, so and I think that's what wears people down. That, look, this is my story, I've told you, and I've told it to you before, I'm telling it to you again. Okay, they might just say something different, and they get picked up on that, and that's what is awful. It is awful when you have a genuine story, you telling them the truth, and they find a way of saying, you're not telling us the truth. No. And really,
And
that's hard.
that's yeah, it's, I mean, I think anybody who has regular contact with state
Yeah.
agencies,
Yeah.
and I think all those people who, as individuals, tried to sign up through the government website to support Ukrainian refugees will have had some experience of just how frustrating all that can be. But to imagine, I think there's a sense sometimes that some people seeking asylum like it because the longer the thing goes on, the longer they can stay. But what you're describing is actually this constant erosion of people's well-being because of that horrible, intimidating, contact where everything, changing goalposts, invisible rules. And if you don't have people to help you, if English isn't your first language, I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Well, obviously you can more than imagine. But it's also unfair, isn't it?
But Alison, I started doing this when I was like just 10 years old. I'm 70 now, and for 60 years it hadn't changed. What I'm telling you, I was doing this as a 10-year-old, writing forms, writing letters, filling in, and people being told, this isn't there, you need to do this, bring this again, go back again, this is a culture of not believing, not accepting that people are telling the truth, that you are lying. That's very, very, that's very nasty. That you're not believed. That it's not nice to be made to feel that you're not telling the truth when you are. If you look at the story of Jesus Christ, he was in court under false allegations. Pilate said 3 times, I don't find any fault here. I don't understand what's going on, yet he was executed. And I think that it's nothing new, and it's torture, and not people are going through. So I think what I want to, repeat again, that if there is a crisis, it lies in the inefficiencies and the cultures of the Home Office processes. 10 years ago, around 80% of asylum cases were processed within 6 months. Today, it takes considerably longer, and the process needs to be speeded up. But it should not be at the expense of listening carefully to the stories of people who are seeking sanctuary. And what that means is we need more well-trained and properly trained officers. I mean, the Home Office is here in Sheffield. I don't want to. I know some of the people who are involved in making those decisions. Then they don't get the best training. They say so. They don't get adequate training, and then they're out there making. They are the ones who are required to make the decision. They get it wrong constantly. So it's a whole culture. It is a culture, a hostile culture. And what do we have to say into that? Well, how do you challenge hostility? Well, what we bring to it is, in terms of our pastoral care and our support, is hospitality. We will work with people who are caught up in this awful situation. And as I say, the whole Cities of Refuge, Cities of Sanctuary, Church of Sanctuary is about working with people who are already here. It's not an immigration policy. It's about working with people who are already here and supporting them while their case is being processed, to give them.
Yeah. We actually have a question, Inderjit, from somebody who said, it's a very practical question. We have all the focus on the small boats, but how actually do most people arrive in the UK? Is that a sensationalized minority?
It is. Well, Ukrainian refugees came here on planes. Most people arrive here on planes. It's a tiny number of people who come here on boat. It's made, the way it's in the news, in the media, in what's the big issue today? It's these useless little boats, and not a huge number of them. But the way, a Home Secretary even speaks of is we're being invaded. No, we must send the Navy out there to stop these these harmless, unarmed people, vulnerable, fragile, already hurting people, and stop them coming here. And they'll spend huge amounts of money on that, when, as I say, it's more compassionate, less cruel, and more humane and hospitable to build sanctuary.
This is the last question. What's your overriding or your underpinning biblical touchstone, would you say? The whole thing. If you could sum it up as one thing.
Not easy. The biblical prophet always held up the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Okay, these in biblical prophets' times were people without means of support. They couldn't have independent lives. A widow has lost the person who was earning the money. The orphan has lost the parents. The stranger is in a hostile environment. So, and I think those were the three people who were held up. And today, for me, There are older people without support, adequate support, children whose lives are in danger, and we've talked about that, and people seeking sanctuary. And I think that in any political campaign, if you talk into your MPs and what have you, if you want to highlight, what are we supposed to be saying to them? What do we actually say to um, to our politicians as they engage with the issues? I think that if you keep challenging them on how are we support, it's not just about people seeking sanctuary, about vulnerable people, and those are the three groups of people who remain in special need today. So I think that's the number one thing. So I think that's one of the issues, and um, the other thing is, I would say, our calling, our challenge as we look at how we um, talk and what are the kind of biblical challenges for us, be human. There are three things I want to say. Every day people set out to cross whatever barriers are in their way to find safety and a better life. When they are deprived of their securities, they will be glad and grateful for welcome and hospitality and safety. Migration has consistently been the hot potato in politics. Well, and the Windrush scandal, again, another anniversary coming up, has exposed the high levels of discrimination and harassment of people from the Caribbean who were invited to come here and work in Britain. And it's all, whether you're invited, whether you come by planes or however you come, it is about a hostile environment and prejudicial environment in which powerless migrants have to navigate citizenship in Britain. And sometimes it can take up to 70 years. Okay, we're talking about a long time for the asylum process. Those Windrush people have been here for 70 years and find themselves in trouble with immigration. And upon taking office in 2012, Theresa May spoke of the aim in the Home Office to create in Britain a hostile environment. Actually said that that's what it's about for people without relevant documents. And so it is a crucible of hatred. It's inhuman and it's inhospitable. And I think the best thing to do within that is to build cultures of welcome and hospitality and to make life better. So my three things that I say, and I'll come to my one biblical thing. Okay, I want to say to people, be human. Three things: be human and call others back to their humanity. We're all human beings. Can we just treat everybody as a human being made in the image of God? Number two, be hospitable and call others to hospitality, and always challenge hostility and hatred. And you challenge hostility and hatred when you challenge inhumanity and when you challenge inhospitality. That's the task that faces us. And okay, so the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Then you go to Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly. All right, that's the answer to the question, what does the Lord require of you? Well, that question is asked somewhere else in the Bible, and it's in Deuteronomy chapter 10. What does the Lord require of you? And the answer that is given, and this is my key text. The answer that is given there is, God loves the stranger, and you shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And this, in Deuteronomy chapter 10, this is stated as walking in the way of God. This is what it is to walk in the way of God. This is what the Lord requires. And you know how many times that command is repeated in scripture, in Hebrew scriptures? To love your neighbor as yourself is stated just once, Leviticus 19 verse 18, but almost 40 times in Hebrew scriptures, in one way or another, it says, you shall also love the stranger. Right. Now, because it is stated so frequently, and it is the most frequently repeated ethical command in the Bible, because it is so frequently stated, I think we have to sit up and take notice of that. That's at the bottom of everything I've said this evening, and it's at the bottom of what my passion is all about. And so it is said that John Wesley preached 40,000 sermons. I've actually counted how many times I've spoken on this text. It's more than 40,000 times. Whenever I'm speaking, any presentations, any comment, anything I'm about, it's about the thing that the world seems to find the most difficult, to love those who are different from us. All right. The environmental crisis, climate change, is a massive issue. It is said to be the biggest challenge facing us. Maybe AI, is the biggest challenge. I don't know. And okay, so poverty is a massive challenge that faces us. But I say, if we don't learn to live beside each other as human beings, we aren't going to work together to tackle climate change and to eradicate poverty. So for me, the number one requirement is for the human race is to learn to live with those who are different from us. If we don't do that, well, we will annihilate each other. And I believe in humanity, and I believe human beings can love those who are different. And City of Sanctuary and the growth of it nationally illustrates to me that in people, compassion is a more compelling principle than cruelty, and hospitality. People are good at that and far better at that than hostility. And so that's the basis of my hope as I look ahead.
That's both an empowering and an optimistic and a practical place, both to finish today and to think, that's something that each and every person, each and every one of us can do.
Yeah.
We walk out of the minute we get up in the morning and the minute we walk out of the door. So Inderjit, I want to say we need to close, but thank you so much. I wanted to actually finish with just some words that I suspect you wrote, but they came in today's Methodist e-news, and it's a collect. This is just a little bit of it, the collect for Refugee Week. I
wrote that for this.
I suspected you did, yeah, but it asks God to bless the courage and resilience of those seeking freedom and sanctuary, and it challenges us to build cultures of welcome, hospitality, and sanctuary for all. Community where there is conflict, compassion where there is cruelty, humanity where there is hatred, and hospitality where there is hostility. I think that's a really good summary of everything you've been exploring this evening, Inderjit. And thank you so much for taking the time to to have the conversation now, but also to put the conversation out there. I'm sure many people will dip into it in the days and weeks and months to come. So thank you. A reminder again, a lot of what we've been talking about this evening is about racism and structural injustice, and do encourage you to look at our conference and see if you can be there. And a big thank you to Joe Priestley and Nick Tall, who are my colleagues here, who've been keeping everything working in the background. So thank you very much, and thank you all for tuning in, as they used to say in the